Welcome to Decoding Social Security, providing benefits to our ancestors. This session is being recorded as part of RootsTech 2021. My name is Michael Strauss. I'm an accredited genealogist in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States, and I have been since 1995. This is a great session that talks about a set of records that's often overlooked and underutilized by genealogists. And those sets of records come from the United States Social Security Administration. But to get an understanding of those records, it is necessary to have a little bit of a historical backdrop and background into these sets of documents. And to do that, it's necessary for us to go back to the time of the beginning of the Great Depression to understand how these records came to pass. On October 24th of 1929, the stock market burst, and in turn, millions of shares were traded, and this became known as Black Thursday. The following week, on October 29th, 1929, another wave of panic swept Wall Street, and millions of additional shares ended up worthless. This was known as Black Tuesday. The president of the time, Herbert Hoover, didn't know how to cope with these problems. And when the next election came up in 1932, with the Depression already now in full swing, the new sitting president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, came up with a plan to be able to combat this problem in the United States. By 1932, when he came into power, between 13 and 15 million Americans were unemployed. Think about these numbers for a moment. That's about 20% of the overall US population. And in the wave of this panic that swept the United States, Roosevelt would want to project calmness. He tried to project optimism to recovery for our country. And those famous words that he was quoted as saying was that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Afterwards, Roosevelt instituted the first of many numerous New Deal programs aimed at what was called the 3 R's under the headings of relief, recovery, and reform. The Social Security Act, passed in 1935, fell under the umbrella of reform, with the intention that this would never happen again on a national scale. So the basis of our modern Social Security system in the United States was passed by an act of Congress on August 14, 1935. This would be the very first attempt at national legislation. By signing this act, Roosevelt became the very first president to advocate federal assistance for our elderly. This was substantial in the realm of historic documents. This picture shows FDR signed and flanked by some of his closest advisors and cabinet members, and pictured behind him was Francis Perkins, who was his Secretary of Labor. All of them supported Roosevelt and his work towards our recovery and our reform during this New Deal era. Once we've established the fact that we understand the history of why this occurred and the record sets that it creates, we need to have an understanding next of these particular records and what they are and what they consist of and how they can help us as genealogists. Once employers received these forms, our ancestors were asked to fill them out. These forms were called the SS5 forms. This in turn would generate a unique Social Security number given to the recipient once they filled out the forms. The application form, called the SS5, contained a lot of useful and valuable genealogy information that we as descendants can use to find information about our ancestors. It contained their first, their middle, their last name, their current mailing address, the name and address of their employers was often provided, their age at their last birthday, their date of birth, their place of birth. This often included their city and exact state of birth, or if they were a foreign birth, they would often give that information as well. The parents' names were given, including the mother's maiden name, their race or color, the date they signed the application, and of course, their signature. I have an example of a card filled out by one of my family members, one of my immediate family members. This is my great-grandfather, Jacob Frank Strauss, who came from Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I had never met him. He died in 1957, several years before I was born, but he filled out his card in 1939. You can see his number at the upper right-hand corner, 175052551. That was his issued Social Security number, and he filled out all the information that was asked on the form. The image with him and his wife, pictured together with the small child, show what they looked like at the time that the form was filled out. His form was completely filled out. Now, for us as genealogists, we would acquire this information not in the same way that he filled out this form, but there are essentially two ways for us to obtain copies of these genealogically rich SS5 forms. The first way is to order the copy directly online through the Social Security Administration. I have included in the handout that's attached to this session detailed instructions and a link to be able to access those online. It's all done through the Freedom of Information Act. You have to create an account and then follow the instructions to be able to access and pay for the record. The second way to access these records, and you can choose either of these ways, they both work, is to request it through the mail. The second way is using form SSA 711. This again is a PDF form. Again, it's available online. In the handout, I've included a detailed link how to obtain a copy of this form, how to fill it out, print it, and then mail it to the through the post office to the Social Security Administration. It's mailed directly to 6100 Wabash Avenue in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, where the headquarters for the administration is housed. Now, once you've filled out the form, you'll probably want to have an understanding of what the cost is associated with obtaining these copies. Now, it does not matter if you do not know the Social Security number. The price remains the same. It just depends on what type of file you want in return. If you want the full SS5 filled out form, like I showed you for Jacob Strauss, that cost is $24, regardless of whether or not you know the number. If you want a computer extract of the card, which is commonly referred to as a numinant, it's, as it implies, it is a computer extract. You do not get the handwriting, you do not get the signature. It's just a truncated, shortened, condensed version of the same information. That's $22, whether or not you know the number or not. And finally, if you, for any reason, need the number, or I should say the copy certified, it would cost an additional $10. People don't often require this, but if you would have the need, there's an additional service that the administration does offer, and that cost is the additional few dollars. Now, once you've ordered the number and you see the number printed on the card, either the extract or the full document, I thought it would be a good idea if we break down and decode the actual numbers themselves, just to gain a better understanding of how the numbering sequence worked. Your Social Security number is broken up into three parts. The first three numbers are called the area number. The second two are called the group number, and the four numbers on the end are called the serial numbers. The numbers are assigned, at least for the area number, were assigned by geographic region. Now, before 1972, the numbers were done in the state where the card was actually issued. After 1972, they were done completely different. This meant before 1972 that you did not have to reside in the place where the number was issued. You could have worked there and resided elsewhere. This was changed after 72. No number issued beginning 000 was ever assigned, was never used. Likewise, there was no numbers beginning with the 800 or 900 series that have ever been assigned. Now, I do have an example here from this slide that if you were specific to one given state, so I reside in Utah. Utah's numbers were 528 and 529. So if I received my number while either living or working in Utah, I would have been assigned those first three numbers, which would indicate where I was either living or working at the time the number was issued. The last series of numbers I'd like you to think about and point attention to is the series of numbers beginning 700 to 728. These were specially issued numbers that were issued by the United States Railroad Board. These were done for railroad employees either through private employers or through the United States Railroad Administration. These were later discontinued in July of 1963. The middle series of numbers was commonly referred to as the group number. This is not related to geography at all, but in the order they were issued. The group numbers were ranging from 01 to 99 or 02 to 98. They were never assigned consecutively. The numbers went back and forth between these series, and they were done more or less randomly. 00 would never be used. It always would begin either 01 or 02. These numbers will help you in another way. Again, they're not geographic based, but they will help in another direction. If you use Steve Morris's website and plug in this series of numbers, the first three with these middle two, his database will help you determine the year or range of time when the number was issued. It will give you an idea of when your ancestor applied for their Social Security number. But the five numbers need to work together to be able to get that information. The last four numbers are commonly referred to as serial numbers. These are the final series of numbers, and they're straight numerical numbers ranging from 0001 to 9999. You can see here on this card, 0000 was never issued, it was never used. It's not uncommon to have siblings in the same family with sequential numbers that were issued at the same time. A great example of this comes from my wife's family. My wife in the late 1970s, along with her two sisters, started to work around the same period of time. All three were issued their Social Security numbers, and their numbers are sequential. They are one digit apart from the other two. So that indicates they received them at the same time. Once we have an understanding of the numbering system, we have an understanding of the history behind the act, we need to have some discussion on where to obtain these numbers and this detail of genealogy information to order the SS5, but we need to start somewhere online on some of the more common and popular genealogy databases. And yes, there is a number of places that you can search for these Social Security numbers and persons who claimed benefits. There's a lot of great genealogy records that are available to you online, and these websites all can provide great details for your family history. For the most part, the data covers between 1935 and 2014. FamilySearch, Ancestry, Genealogy Bank, the National Archives, MyHeritage, and finally Steve Morris, all of these websites contain databases that allow you to do full searches for individuals who had received Social Security numbers and or claimed benefits. Keeping in mind that some of the above indices I mentioned are obviously subscription-based, while others are free. To access anything after 2014, if you would have any need to look for descendants and you want to know someone who died after 2014, you must make contact with the National Technical Information Services as part of the United States Department of Commerce. Now, I don't have time in this short session to show you all of these databases just to give you an idea of how they work, but I do have time to share with you at least one of them. I'm going to share the example from FamilySearch. FamilySearch is a very easy way to access these online, keeping in mind that not all of these databases provide the numbers, but they do provide the proof of death. So go back and forth and get creative between each of these databases and compare and contrast the information found within each database. Some might contain more information than the others. With that said, the entries from FamilySearch don't quite stretch back as far as 1935. There are a handful that certainly do cover those years, but the bulk of their database covers 1962 to 2014. Most of the entries found in the Social Security Death Index on Ancestry provide this information. You see here from this slide showing you the screenshot from the FamilySearch website. They want the first, the last name, the birthplace if you can provide it, the range of years for birth, and if you can give any other information to help filter out your selection, it will enable you to hone in on the correct individual. Now, outside of searching those databases, genealogists need to think about other places to search for Social Security numbers or information about them and have an understanding as to how that information does connect. Again, 1935 to 2014, where individuals may have claimed benefits. I'm going to ask that you consider 3 additional sources. I mentioned briefly about the Railroad Board. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the delayed birth certificates and the United States Federal Census, as that does contain, at least for one census, valuable information regarding Social Security. So this example shows something from the Railroad Board. Those records are housed in the National Archives in Moreau, Georgia. That's near Atlanta. The original Railroad Board administration files are contained there. If you find a file there, get the file at their office, plus get the SS5 form. It is a great combination of genealogy information. You'll be happy that you did it. The second thing I think you should consider looking at is to look at delayed births. Now, the Social Security Administration at the same time required a lot of people that were asking for benefits and were requesting their own benefits. They had to provide proof of their birth. And this was oftentimes done in states where birth certificates did not exist during this time. I am from Pennsylvania and I'm a native of the state. Pennsylvania did not record birth certificates statewide until the year 1906. So any elderly individual in the 40s or 50s who was requesting their Social Security benefits clearly would have been born before the state mandated birth certificates. So states individually, by session laws and statutes, passed session laws that it took into part the passage of acts to create the delayed birth certificates. In 1941, Pennsylvania began their very earliest birth certificates that were part of delayed births. This example shows one of my relatives who was living in California of the time, and in 1942, he filed his delayed birth certificate in Pennsylvania, and in turn, this was created as part of his permanent record. And then several years later, when he requested his benefits from the Social Security Administration, he was able to provide proof of his birth. The final set of records I need you to think about comes from the United States Federal Census. Now, as genealogists, we should be using these often and as often as we can. And we know that the federal census exists from 1790 through present time, with the last one made available to us right now in 1940. The 1950 isn't due to be released until April 1st of 2022. But the last census that we have now is the 1940 census, and it does contain questions regarding Social Security, but it's only found in the supplemental section, and it only takes into account 5% of the overall population that received those supplemental questions at the bottom of the form. There were 3 questions, 42, 43, and 44, that all related to Social Security. Whether or not the individual had a number, yes or no. All of these had to be answered. Whether or not there was old age insurance or railroad deductions are made from a result of the benefits received, or whether or not it was part or full benefits. This was all asked as part of the questionnaires found on the application and the form of the federal census. Use all these additional records to help in your genealogy search. With that said, I want to thank you for attending this lecture on decoding Social Security. I hope that you enjoyed this and was able to gain valuable information. Please enjoy the rest of the online sessions provided by RootsTech 2021. And again, I thank you for attending this session.